Hello everyone, my name is Borax and I've been on a mission to play and rate every single champion in the support role. Today we'll be looking at Trundle, and the reasons why he can work as a support include a passive which heals Trundle whenever a nearby enemy dies. The amount of sustain this gives you in lane with the minions perishing around you is actually insane and feels really nice. It also scales based on the health of the enemy who is dying, so you can heal a lot from neutral objectives and champions. He has his Q, which is an auto attack reset that deals bonus damage, slows his target by 75% for 0.1 second, and steals some of the enemy's AD. This ability is on such a low cooldown, and the attack damage steal is great if you can get it on the enemy ADC. He has his W, which grants Trundle bonus attack speed, movement speed, and healing from all sources, which does include his passive and ultimate drain. Next, Trundle has his E, which lets him erect a pillar of ice that will last for 6 seconds while slowing enemies who are nearby. This ability has amazing range on it and can be used to knock back foes if you place the pillar on top of them, either to push them closer to your team or further away. Finally, he has his ultimate, which lets Trundle steal 40% of the target's current armor and magic resist, while also draining their health over a duration. This ability is amazing for shredding tanks and making Trundle himself feel quite tanky. Because this ability works on current armor and magic resist, if you can use it on an opponent who just activated Aftershock or use a resistance steroid, then you can get ridiculously tanky by stealing all of their stats. While Trundle is traditionally a jungler, he has been played in the support role in the pro scene in the past, which makes me wonder, could he still be viable in Season 12? Well, let's find out together, as I rate Trundle, the Troll King, on his ability to be played in the support role.
Time to troll!
In the early game, I like to rate a support's ability to invade lane and roam. Trundle is ridiculously overpowered level 1 if you start Q, and have a keystone such as lethal tempo or press the attack. And while supports in the past used to take PTA, I think the new rune option of Glacial Augment is superior, as you can proc it nicely if you land your pillar knockup, causing quite a disruption. Your E is still solid if you want to try and invade, as you can throw it from range, setting up your team to land some of their own CC, but it requires your team to have CC of their own, which would normally be coming from the support role. For invading, I will give Trundle an A+. If you get a good pillar off, it can be devastating for low mobility characters like this Teemo who thought he was being clever. Or if the enemies are invading your team, you could start Q, which has a much shorter cooldown and has great power early levels, and because of all of this versatility, I think he deserves this somewhat decent rating. Now let's talk about laning. I like to judge a champion based on 3 categories: poking, peeling, and all-inning. Trundle has no ranged abilities that deal damage, as his pillar is only a slow and obstacle creation, which means his poke should be non-existent, right? If you said yes, then you deserve an A+, but sadly, Trundle gets a D here. If you are confident enough to run up to the enemy to start hitting them, then that means you should be all-inning them at that moment, and that's not poke. He also should never be getting level 2 versus other bot lanes, so you won't be able to find early cheese damage for the most part. The only reason I'm giving him a D here is because I think he's very handsome. It's because, in theory, you could use your pillar to help your laner set up their own poke, which isn't too shabby. Trundle is great at peeling, as your E provides so much disruption if utilized correctly, and you can actually stall for a very long time in close fights, thanks to your passive providing you with heals as the fights are happening. Your pillar is also one of the best tools to stop channels from decimating your team, such as Jhin, Caitlyn, Miss Fortune, or this random Vel'Koz who wouldn't leave us alone in bot lane and forgot what my E does. For peeling, I will give Trundle a S-. Against enchanters who need their jungler to set up plays, you can just pillar them as you run out. Against engaged supports, you can actually try to turn this situation by running towards the enemy ADC, queuing them, which will chunk them and steal a bit of their AD, as well as slowing them, which will make them weaker in the 2v2. If you have your ultimate, it's even easier to outplay enemy engaged champs, as you can steal their tankiness and either shred them or use that strength to beat up that enemy ADC. You might be thinking that peeling sounds like it's quite related to all-inning, which would be a very accurate observation, as Trundle doesn't have the traditional heals and shields, and the CC slow in his Q requires you to hit the enemies. Truthfully, a lot of Trundle lanes will be rather passive, as you can't do too much damage against enchanters, and you're better at responding to engages than starting them off. Trundle's weakness is his lack of consistent hard CC, but if you can get a gank, your pillar is almost always a guaranteed kill if the enemy has low mobility and no flash. If you can pillar behind them while also getting that knockback to proc your Glacial Augment, then Trundle's engage is quite strong, especially because the damage he outputs is solid for the support role. His natural attack speed from W and low cooldown auto attack reset on Q that steals AD makes me confident in giving Trundle an A+ for all inning. If you can get on top of your laners, then it will be most likely lights out for them. But it can be a bit tricky to force the issue if you misuse your pillar, as you could potentially push them away and create an obstacle actually blocking you off. Or if they have a decent amount of mobility, they could just avoid the slow zone altogether, and because of these limitations, I won't put them any higher. Now that we've talked about Trundle's laning prowess, let's rate the matchups that you might have to face. Truthfully, Trundle is kind of a Chad, where there aren't too many impossible matchups, as he's great at neutralizing lanes a bit with his powerful presence and play-stopping capabilities if you hold pillar. But that being said, champions with a ton of mobility like Rakan are not great for Trundle, as they can ignore his pillar fairly easily, and Rakan also scales better. Speaking of scaling, we have Yuumi, who you probably will never be able to kill unless you get ganks, and man does that rat ever scale in the game, so you'll probably want to ban her actually. Now, I know this category is called play safe or die usually, but let me fix it. There, much better. Trundle can struggle to force plays, and if these enchanters can just freely scale, that will not be good for your team. That being said, if they do push up a lot, you can definitely catch them out with your pillar, but you will need a gank as your damage won't be enough to blow through their peeling capabilities. Next up we have the actual hardest matchups, which are poke supports. You'll be quite miserable as they chunk you down, but if they ever miss their CC, your pillar is a very powerful tool to catch these champions out and to run them down with your team. Champions that Trundle can do rather well into are the melee engage champions who are susceptible to your ult, as he will usually build resistances, or in Pyke's case, he will be susceptible to your AD ceiling Q and general tankiness. In the past, supports usually always went Aftershock, which made Trundle ult extremely powerful as you could hold your ulti until they proc the keystone, giving you a ton of resistances. So you might get lucky that they make that mistake, or they'll just take Glacial Augment now, which does neutralize your ult strength a bit. Two champions that still have resistance buffing abilities in Leona W and Braum W make for great matchups, as you can use your ulti after they use these abilities to become incredibly tanky and help your team blow them up. Finally, we have a bunch of champions in the who plays these guys even, as I'm waiting to see people pick these characters in my games. But truthfully, besides Bard, you would actually do quite well into almost all of these matchups. Now, normally I would talk about ADCs you want to pair Trundle with, but first, let's talk about ADCs that Trundle counters, and there's one specific one, which is why he was meta all those years ago, and it's of course, Sivir. You see, Sivir has her E spell shield, which normally neutralizes most forms of engage, but Trundle Pillar doesn't care about this ability, as you can still disrupt her movement with your pillar, and she will be slowed by it as she can't spell shield the effect. Trundle is great into most immobile characters, which thankfully describes most ADCs, but those with dashes you will not want to see. I will finally shout out Jhin and Misfortune as decent matchups for Trundle, as if you are near enough to them, you can stop their powerful channeled ultis by using your E to knock them to the side. Alright, now for ADCs that you want to pair alongside Trundle. There aren't really too many crazy combos, but my favorite ones are the ones who can utilize the fact that you build Imperial Mandate to do bonus damage. Champions that come to mind include Misfortune and Ezreal, who should have an easy time to proc your Mandate damage after you pillar and Glacial Augment people. Two more champions I will shout out include Jhin, who can use his W to root people after you pillar them for a devastating long-range combo. And finally Vayne, who you can try to be tricky with to pillar behind them into a condemn to get a nasty stun off, but it can be quite hard as the pillar is not the widest. In the hypothetical case that your ADC is a useless bonobo, then you definitely might want to consider roaming from time to time, so let's talk about that. Trundle is traditionally a jungler, and one that I actually play quite frequently, which means his ability to roam should be rather solid, right? Correct, viewer. I have to say, you've been doing really well with these questions. I'm impressed. Trundle Pillar is such an amazing ability, and I always say it feels like an ultimate. The range on it is super far, and the amount of disruption that it can cause can be an easy death sentence or easily blown flash. The fact that it is so non-committal also makes it even more powerful, as there's low risk if the play goes poorly, as you can just back away and go back to your lane. With the addition of his W granting Trundle a fair amount of movement speed to run towards scraps or get away if he's getting caught out, lets me give him a S for roaming. If he was able to get over walls, he'd be an easy S+, as that's a great way to avoid vision. But despite this one weakness, his long range CC easily lets him keep such a high score, so that's exactly what you want in a roam, and the fact that it's rather difficult to mess up only makes it better. Let's give Trundle a rating for his ability to support in the early game, which will slot at an A+. I didn't lose many lanes, well except for the random Poppy and Nivea lane I faced up against, and that's because Trundle is not only the Troll King as he likes to shout during the game, but he's also the king of just chilling in lane and neutralizing it. If you can, you want to try and find timings to gank other lanes, as he's really powerful in doing so, especially because it can be a bit tricky to outright win your bot lane matchup without the help of your team. Speaking of needing teammates, I wonder how Trundle fares when it comes to the more team-centric portion of the game, known as
I'm Troll Judge, Troll Jury, and Execute Troll.
In the late game, responsibilities of a support like to rate include their ability to get picks into teamfight. If there's an isolated target somewhere, there are few champions better at punishing that than Trundle. Oftentimes when I'm playing this champion, if I see someone on their lonesome who doesn't have mobility, I know that they are dead if I have my team nearby, as Pillar is such a powerful tool in catching people out. Even if they are a tank, your ultimate being able to steal 40% of their resistances and drain their health makes it easier to burst them down before they can get help from their team. For getting picks, I have no choice but to give Trundle a S+. Not only is Pillar amazing because of its range, obstacle creation, and lingering slow, it's also a basic ability, meaning you will almost always have it up and ready to pick people off who are playing too cocky. Now let's talk about team fighting, where support's responsibilities include engaging, peeling, and sometimes dealing damage. Engaging on Trundle Support is, believe it or not, very similar to getting picks, as it's throwing your pillar out at an immobile carry and hoping your team can follow up on that with their own forms of engage. As after you pillar, you don't have any more hard CC, but thankfully with Glacial Augment, your E is still very powerful. If you get a good pillar off, you can look to go really hard in the team fight, especially if the enemy has a big tank like Sejuani or Ornn that you can then ulti to be fairly tanky in the team fight, looking to run at squishies with your W buffs and start queuing them down, where the huge but short duration slow will be nice to help you and your team stick onto those carries. If your pillar wasn't a good one and actually push a carry away instead of towards your team, then no stress, just ping your team caution and wait for your pillar cooldown to come back down so that you can try again. For engaging, I will give Trundle a S-. His pillar is an amazing tool to start off fights, but if it's your only source of engagement, it isn't quite enough CC and setup for me to give Trundle a higher rating for engaging, as you would like someone else who can follow up on your pillar to make sure you can get a really good fight going. Peeling as Trundle is quite nice, especially if you just consider that he can stop really powerful channeled ultimate like Fiddlesticks ulti and enjoy as he just gets stuck in the wall and dies to your team. Besides stopping channels, Pillar can also give your carries just the perfect amount of space they need to not get killed by that pesky Yi who's been running them down all game. Another nice thing about Trundle is how surprisingly tanky you can be if people try to focus you down. So if you have been trash talking people all game and they try to focus you down, you'll be quite happy as your ultimate can buy so much time for you to survive as your important members waste abilities on you as your team cleans them up. If you stand next to your carries, your Q is also a very solid ability for peeling, as the persistent slow provides a decent amount of disruption against bruisers and other tanks. For peeling, I will give Trundle an A+. He is fantastic against melee DPS and bruisers, but can be quite lackluster against assassins or poke champions, as he doesn't have any healing, shielding, or point and click CC. Dealing damage as Trundle is rather interesting, as I usually like to build Imperial Mandate, as you can proc it so easily with your Pillar, Glacial Augment, and even Q, meaning you get to use its passive quite frequently. Trundle doesn't do a ton of damage, but at the same time he does deal a fair bit and can really scrap with people thanks to his ultimate healing him a ton and making him rather tanky. For this category, I'll give Trundle a B. He does damage, especially with Imperial Mandate in combination with a more poke-centric team, but at the same time, his damage never really wowed me, so I won't put it any higher. Before we rate Trundle's overall ability to support, let's take a look at the runes and items that I would recommend. I believe that Glacial Augment suits Trundle's support very well, as it empowers your pillar immensely if you can knock people up with it, further slowing everyone who is in the area and proccing your Imperial Mandate more. For the rest of the tree, you can honestly take every single one of these runes. I like to take Stopwatch, as it can buy time for your passive, and ulti to heal you while also baiting enemies. Biscuit Delivery is good if you are in a very difficult lane, but more often than not, Futures Market to get item spikes earlier or Minion Dematerializer to secure a push and enable more roam timings is also very solid. Approach Velocity feels amazing if you think you can have a more aggressive lane, as it will let you run people down even more with all of your slows. I think Glacial Augment is the clear number one choice, but other options you could go for include Guardian if you really want to focus on peeling and being a tanky boy for your team. On the opposite side of the coin, if you want to be really aggressive in lane and think you can steamroll it, then you could go for Press the Attack, as Trundle does apply it so easily with his Q, and giving your ADC bonus damage is very nice. But after the durability patch, I think it's a bit harder to run people down early on, but feel free to prove me wrong and let me know if you're able to pop off in the comments below. Now let's talk about items. For your gold income item, Steel Shoulder Guards is definitely your best bet, as you want the minion execute and you deal a lot more AD damage than AP in the early game. For your first item, I'm a strong believer in an early Ionian Boots of Lucidity Rush, as the item is fairly cheap, helps you roam, and gives you pillar cooldown, which is what you really want. If the enemy is full AD or AP though, then don't be shy and feel free to buy the appropriate boots. Next up, you want to build towards your Mythic, and I think Imperial Mandate is the best Trundle support item. Sure, you might not be that tanky because of it, but you will still be fairly tanky if you can ult an enemy with lots of resistances, and you can just proc the Mandate so easily with your abilities, and it makes it feel very solid. The other mythic that I think you can go for is Locket, if you just want to emphasize peeling for your team and don't think you need to provide more damage, especially because the mythic passive is a lot better on this item than Imperial Mandate, which gives you AP that only works on your ultimate. I did try out Evan Shroud, but it didn't feel very good as it only procs on your pillar when you knock someone up or when you get CC'd, so proccing Imperial Mandate is a lot easier overall. Another item I ended up building quite frequently was Thornmail if the enemy team has a lot of healing, as you can proc it decently with your E knockup, which I know I said was a knock on Evan Shroud, but if your team needs anti-heal, Thornmail is still a great item. Other items that have merit for Trundle support include Deadman's or Frozen Heart against heavy AD teams, or Force of Nature against heavy AP teams to help you survive. If only one person is a major threat, then an item like Anathema's Chains is an excellent answer and has a great build path in general. If you want to provide more appeal for your carry, Knight's Vow could be a solid pickup to try and keep them alive for longer. The final item that I did try out was Zhonya's, which actually felt pretty decent, as while your ulti is running you are very tanky and hard to kill, and then as it's ending you can try and use Zhonya's to save your life and maybe get out or use one more pillar for your team. But now that the item is more expensive and more focused on AP, it definitely doesn't feel as worth it in the support role. Now that we've talked about runes and items, let's give Trundle an overall rating for his ability to support, which I'll slot at a S rating. Truthfully, I lost almost every Trundle support game that I ended up playing, but it really did feel like team diff, as I was having quite a solid impact in most games. Trundle Pillar is one of the best abilities in the entire game, and it's just as solid from the support role, considering that it doesn't scale with any items, as the ability does 0 damage, so as long as you know how to use Trundle Pillar well, you can have a major impact with this pick. His ability to counter tanks is also amazing, so if that's what becomes prevalent in the bot lane, I would make the case that Trundle support could find himself in the meta once again. Would I recommend you play Trundle support? Absolutely. This is one of my favorite off-meta supports, and not only one I have played in ranked games, but a pick that I've also lost to in ranked games. This pick is indeed very conditional, where you want to be against enemy tanks and immobile carries, but if he checks off those boxes, then the amount of power he has is superb. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and leave it a like, that would be amazing, and if you would consider subscribing, that would make my day. We also have a Discord, link in the description, so feel free to check that one out if you want to chat. Again, thanks for watching, and I want to wish you good luck and have fun if you're playing Trundle support yourself. You might need it.